everybody. Thanks for tuning into the channel today. Going to do just a question and answer session. A bunch of questions have come in over the last a little bit here in the comments to several videos, and they range from everything from strings to banjitars, 12-string effects, a number of different things. And so I would just thought I would just share some of those out, make one general video to answer several of those questions. First questions came in on a series of videos where I had a couple of Ovation guitars in there, and they were asking what kind of Ovations was I playing. Both of my, I've got 4 different Ovation guitars, and the ones in those particular videos, the 12-string is a 1978 Ovation Pacemaker. That's their 12-string model from that particular period, and the other one is an Ovation Balladeer from the same year, 1977, 1978, thereabout. I also have an Ovation Classical that I use sometimes. It doesn't show up on video too much, but I do use it for some recording. And I have an Ovation Patriot, which is one of their first limited edition models that they put out in 1976. Lots of questions come in frequently about what kind of strings do I use. It varies a bit because I've got over a dozen guitars and banjitars, and so it does vary. With the 6-string guitars, generally I will use the Martin Tommy Emmanuel set. I really like the gauging and the feel of those. For a 12-string, I'll either use Martin Flexible Core lights. That's like a 10 set, and that sounds really good on my Guild. On my Ovation Pacemaker 12, I usually use silk and steel strings on that one, and I use the GHS mediums on those. On electric guitars, I use almost exclusively Ernie Ball strings. I've just used those for years. I like the feel of them. They're consistent. They sound great, but it varies with the different gauges. On my Starcaster, I'll use 10s. On my new Epiphone Emperor Regent, I use there's an 11 set that they make that has a wound third, and so I like that particular that's a good jazz set for that one. For banjitars, I also use Ernie Ball electric guitar strings, the nickel wound strings. A lot of banjos have nickel wound strings on them, and I usually just general either an 8, like a 9 or a 10 gauge light gauge on the banjitars. So that kind of covers it for strings. Those are the brands. I've tried every kind of brand coming and going that they've ever made, and I do try other stuff just from time to time just to see if there's anything new out there, but I tend to come back to the things that I like and have used for years. So that kind of ties in with the second question here on the banjitars. Are those guitar strings or banjo strings? The banjitars, normally they come from the factory with bronze wound 6-string guitar sets. Sometimes they're like the loop end rather than the ball end. I just replace those with electric guitar sets, and I don't take the ball off. They just thread in through the tailpiece, and that works just fine. Somebody asked here about, do I tune my guitars to standard? 6-string guitars, some of them yes. Sometimes I use Open G tuning a whole lot, so I have a guitar that's dedicated just for Open G tuning. I have now the 12 strings. They're generally tuned a whole step down, sometimes a half step down, sometimes lower, just depends on the song. But as a 90% of the time, my 12 strings are tuned one whole step down, except for the electric 12 behind here, my Cozart electric 12, which stays at standard pitch. Somebody said, what's my string height on 12 string? Well, I don't usually measure it, and it's just as low as I can get it. I like to have the strings be rather tight but low. I like to have a tight low action. So if it was possible to have it where it was like 1 millimeter above the frets, I'd get it there, but it generally doesn't do that. And so I try to, it varies with the guitar as to how low I can get it. Somebody said, what model is my Guild with the hummingbirds on the headstock? The Guild here behind me, it's a 2512, an F2512. That's one of their ones made in Indonesia or China, something like that. I've owned American-made Guilds before, and this one is a pretty close approximation of one of those. It does have some differences and stuff, like a Pal-Faro fingerboard, but it does have a solid top. But the hummingbirds and things on there are some customizations that I made. When I got the instrument, I got it really, really cheap because it was kind of tore up, and there were some bad finish places on it. And so I'm not great at doing refinishing, but I did refinish and kind of fix the top up so it looks pretty decent. And I added the hummingbirds at that time. So there's some hummingbirds on the headstock and on the lower bout of the body and on the pickguard. And so that's kind of a pretty little addition in there, but it's an F25 12. Somebody asked about baritone strings for 12 string. Baritone guitar is usually tuned down a fourth or a fifth, so it means like your E string would be tuned down to like a low B. There are some sets, I think La Bella is the only one I know of. Maybe John Pierce makes a set where you can tune them down to like a low B. I have taken some medium gauge 12 strings and tuned them down to a C sharp before, which is just, that's just a whole step above being down to, that's close to baritone range. But the strings tend to get floppy at that range, and so you need to have some more meat in there. And usually with baritone strings, because of the diameters of the strings, it usually means you have to recut the nut slots at the top. And I'm not a big fan of modifying my guitars for something that just might be just so I'm going to try these strings out and see how that works. I don't want to permanently modify a guitar in order just to try out some strings. So I don't play in the baritone guitar range, but La Bella does do a set that tunes all the way down to a B. And then if you're trying to approximate some lead belly type stuff, that might be the way to go. And then somebody just, one of them just out of the blue here is kind of an existential question. Why 12 strings? But it's like the difference between playing a piano and a pipe organ, I think. I think Leo Kottke made that comparison. And there's just so much more sound to work with the 12 string. It makes it easy to be a soloist compared to the 6 string, where you're always trying to run out of fingers and frets and trying to span things to get the sound. The 12 string just fills it out so nicely. So I have been a 12 string guitarist primarily. That's the way I picture myself. That's my role as an instrumentalist. I do play 6 string banjo guitar, mandolin, but the 12 string guitar is kind of home base for everything else that I do. Okay, so here's a kind of a technical question. Does truss rod adjustment affect the action at the 12th fret? Well, you have to figure your 2 endpoints. Your speaking length of your string is your nut and your bridge. Now I've got this 12 string banjo guitar here, but it's the same principle involved. And you've got the string's going to be a straight line all the time. Now when your string moves, it moves more in the middle than it does on either end. So when it vibrates, so it actually makes an ellipse, an elliptical shape. So you need to, most people like to have a little bit of what's called relief in the neck so that it will match the shape of that ellipse. So instead of the neck being perfectly straight, you usually have a little bit of relief so that the string can vibrate more in the middle and not buzz, and then up here it's not going to buzz up on the top frets. So that is kind of an artful thing to be able to do that. That affects the bridge height, the how deep the nut slots are cut, the height of the frets. A lot of different factors involved in that. But yes, when you the idea behind a truss rod is to allow you to make seasonal adjustments in the wooden neck of the guitar with that rod, or maybe you change gauge of strings. You go from a light to a medium, or a medium to a light. And so the amount of tension on the neck will shift with that. And so what you can do is you can adjust the straightness of the neck and the amount of relief you want to leave in the neck. So it's not just about just affecting the action. Now, if you have a perfectly flat neck and you have the action really low, you're probably going to get some buzzing. If you have a little bit of relief, it's going to be a little bit higher in certain places in the neck, particularly around the 12th fret, which is the midpoint of the speaking length of the string. So yeah, you can lower the action a little bit with the truss rod, but the idea behind the truss rod is mainly to counteract the pull of the strings, not to set action. Action height's determined by the height of your bridge. That's the main thing there. Let's say between spring and winter and spring, the top on your guitar may shift just a little bit because of the amount of humidity in the room, and so you can, if your neck, if you sense that your guitar becomes difficult to play, like during the spring, or if it starts to fret out and flatten out and buzz during the winter when the months are really dry, you can use your truss rod to correct for that a little bit. My thing that I like to do on guitars where I get that kind of shift, I've got that low of an action, is I just make 2 different bridge saddles, and I'll have one that's a winter saddle and one that's a summer saddle. And when it starts to get to the point in the wintertime where the action is a little bit lower, rather than redo my neck, when I change strings, I'll just put the winter bridge in. Then in the spring, when the action starts to feel a little high because the humidity comes up and the top begins to belly up just a little bit, Then I'll put the summer saddle in. So that's usually my solution there for keeping the action as low as I can possibly get it and still deal with the seasonal changes that happens within the wood. Oh, somebody asked, are thinner gauge strings less prone to snapping than the thicker strings? Meaning that lower gauge equals less tension to pitch. Alternatively, there are exotic materials for thin strings, composite core. I don't know if I even know what they're talking about on that one. Basically, I mean, you crank a string to the point of breaking, it's going to break. It's what happens. If you play with a light touch, they may not break at all. If you play with a heavy touch, even medium strings will break. If you've got a burr in the nut up here or on your bridge, a little sharp edge there, they can break. If you're playing an electric guitar and you're really bending strings a lot, they can break. It has little to do with what the string is made of, I think. It has more to do with how you play, and maybe if your guitar maybe needs an adjustment or something. Somebody asked about banjotars, and they said, is the head on the banjo like a drum skin? Yeah, they're made by Remo, which makes drum heads. It's just a particular size, and they make them just for banjos, but it's the same material, same frosted kind of stuff, and you can get them in white, and you can get them in black, and get them in clear. It's just like a drum head. And does the tuning depend on the make of guitars? And why have you got 12 string guitars? I don't know that I ever had 12 string guitars. I think I had 8 at one time. The roster here kind of shifts. Things move in and out as I am optimizing, or right now I'm in the point of like downsizing my collection a bit, just because it's if you get too many guitars, you don't get enough chance to play them all, and you end up just dusting them. Just trying to keep them strung becomes with fresh strings becomes an issue. So I'm just trying to downsize the guitars just a little bit. But does the tuning depend on the make of the guitar? Not so much the make of the guitar, but the sound that I'm after with a particular instrument. Some instruments are really bassy and deep. Some are really trebly and bright. And so sometimes I'm trying to balance out the sound in order to get a particular blend of tones that I want to get, or I'm trying to enhance a sound that guitar, like if it's a really bright zingy guitar, I might put the brightest zingiest strings on there I can get in order to really complement that particular set of resonances that's peculiar to that particular guitar. This guild back over here, really deep bass, and so I tend to go with bronze wound strings on it because it makes it a little brighter. Whereas my Ovation 12 string, kind of on this side, it's super bright, and so I go with silken steels to kind of mellow it out a little bit. So it just depends on, not so much the brand, but as what the guitar is used for. And certain guitars, just because of the way they feel, every guitar is kind of individual, even within a particular make. I've played Martin 12 strings that were real dogs, and I've played Martin 12 strings that were really nice, and I've played Taylors that were superb instruments, and some that I hated. So it just depends on the instrument itself, more so than the brand, and what I'm going to use that particular guitar for. If I'm doing strummy things, I might something really light. If I'm doing some Leo Kottke stuff where I'm tuning down low, I need heavier strings on that, and that's going to make a difference. So those are kind of the choices that I make in the what kind of strings to use on a particular instrument. On my Cozart Telecaster, which is the one here in the center behind me, somebody said, is it a 6-string or 12-string saddle bridge? It's a 12-string saddle bridge. It has 6 saddles, but each saddle has an adjustable element that you can move back and forth for the intonation. It's kind of a pain in the butt to do the intonation. Once you get it set, just keep it there. It's not an easy thing to do on that particular style of instrument. What brand is my 6-string banjo? Well, I have 3 6-string banjos. I did sell one a while back, and I have my primary one as a no-name, and I just call it the Moon guitar because it's got a moon inlay on it, but it doesn't have a name or a brand or anything on it. It's just a basic, very inexpensive instrument, but it sounds good. My wife gave it to me for a present, and it's got some sentimental value, and so that's the one I keep in standard tuning. Then I have an SX banjo, which is probably the best sounding 6-string banjo that I have. It has the aluminum or zinc or whatever it's made out of, the metal flange and ring all together. It sounds really good. It's very heavy. And I keep that one tuned in Nashville tuning, which especially enhances the sound of that one. And then of course then I got my Dean. This is the 12-string Banjitar Monster, and this is tuned in Nashville tuning. Double Nashville tuning, and so it's kind of like a 12-string, but it's not tuned like a 12-string guitar. These are not octaves; they are pairs, more like a mandolin. There's several videos on my channel here about Ovation guitars, and somebody asked about how do they record studio-wise. Ovation guitars to me it was a superior design. Late 20th century. It was an innovation that using that bowl-shaped back made out of a fiberglass material. They act sort of like, think of like an amphitheater, pardon the dog barking, but that bowl projects the sound forward. They project farther and more than any other kind of brand of guitar that you're going to find, and they're quite loud, substantially louder than most woodback guitars. So recording wise, they record great. They're usually very even. It's usually not too bass heavy, not too treble heavy. They record fantastically. They also have the pickup system in them as well, and at least some of the models do. I only have two of them that have the electric system in there. And if you blend that sounds awesome. The pickup system is mainly for live use, but blending it at the mixing console when you're recording, you get some real nice effects though. But yeah, they record great. I love them. And you go back through any of the music of the 70s and the early 80s. If you hear an acoustic guitar on record, it's more than likely an Ovation, because they dominated the market during that time. So do they sound great? Yes. Think of all the different hits that used them. They had hundreds of celebrity endorsers, and so yeah, in that particular period, which to me is like a golden age of pop music, Ovation guitar was all over everything. Oh, here's a question. Can I play bluegrass on a 6-string banjo? I would probably not recommend it. It's 6-string banjo for some reason. Traditional 5-string banjo players are the most intolerant people that you ever run into. They are the most closed-minded people you'll ever run into. It's like showing up with a 6-string banjo to a jam session with a bunch of bluegrass players. It's like a Catholic with a rosary showing up at the Baptist revival. They are gonna blast you. It's not a welcome thing. They look down on it, something terrible. Not to mention that the 6-string banjo has been around longer than the 5-string banjo, and that it's in many ways it's a superior instrument for other styles of music. Now I understand for bluegrass, 5-string banjo is it, but hey, try and play in the key E flat or A flat with one without having to use a capo or retune. You're not going to be able to do it on a regular banjo. So the 6-string banjo has some real benefits to it. But again, it doesn't sound. It's not made to sound like flattened Scruggs and that kind of thing. I've seen people kind of approximate it. Yeah, it's not going to sound that way. I think it's got its own voice. It's its own thing. I play it as if it's its own thing, and I don't try to just replicate just what a 5-string banjo player is trying to do. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and sign off here. I've been kind of sitting around here yammering for about 20-25 minutes, and I'm going to chop this all down. So thanks for tuning in. I hope you found some of these questions, these answers useful. Like, subscribe, and share, like I said at the beginning. And thanks for tuning in. And I'll be back with more content for you soon. Bye.